Well, here we have part 3 of the Continentals for 1972, the Lincoln Continental Mark IV and the Lincoln Continental Coupe. I'll put the link in the description if you haven't seen part 1 and 2 with Mark. Let's listen in. And let's talk about one other design detail here that you have on this car, the stainless piece over top of the
That was one
fenders.
very often used and reused feature on the Lincoln Continentals was the fender shape that was capped by a piece of brightwork, and that was initially done, of course, to conceal the bodywork. There's a seam there between the outer and inner fenders. It's a very complex shape. So those are two-piece fenders or two-piece door skins, and then in order to cover the seam in the middle, they would add a piece of brightwork, and that was a very successful feature on the 1961 Continentals. And so Lincoln kept that on and on for many years, all the way through the 1970s. And it was something that many other car makers tried to copy, but never quite as successfully as Lincoln executed it.
Yeah, and this one doesn't have that. This is just a clean...
That's the difference, again, between the regular Lincoln Continental and the Mark series, is that, again, here it's quite reduced. And they finished this seam. This is a very complex fender. You see it has the same amount of draw. So I would assume that this fender, because it is a one-piece fender, it was probably struck in the press from many angles over many steps in order to get the shape.
I can't even imagine how they did this hood with this. This area had to have been relatively tough for metal
I
flow.
have not, there is no evidence because of the inner panel. You can't really see how they finished the metal, but we know that on the 67 through 70 Cadillac Eldorado, this whole hood, which was similar in shape with a very strong crease in the center and a lot of deep draws, was two pieces. And then I think Wayne Cady talked about it, how it was simplified for 71.
To one piece.
To one piece. On this car you have a similar approach, and it is a single piece stamping, so it's quite remarkable that they could do that without any stretching or creasing and wrinkling in the metal. In those days the quality of the metal was a bit softer and more elastic than what we're using today with a high-strength steel, so you could do that.
Well, you jogged my memory on something too. Both of these cars, I believe, the exterior Class A surface metal was done by the Budd Company.
That is correct, because they had very high quality standards or targets, and to ensure the mass-produced standards that we're normally getting at their stamping plants wasn't good enough for these cars. That's another exclusive feature of the Wixom built cars, that they outsourced some of the metal execution to get the high level of quality desired.
And it is high level.
It is very high level.
The gaps on these cars are just...
It's very good, and they look just as wonderful today as they did 50 years ago. It's remarkable that these cars are half a century old, and they are really still quite modern in some way. They represent a very sober approach to the industrial design, and they still have just as much impact today, maybe even more than they had.
Even more, because they're so starkly... I mean, you don't see a massive two-door car anymore.
And you don't see these kinds of proportions anymore. Everything is so chunky and so tall today, and with a few exceptions, and everybody, of course, drives crossovers and SUVs now, so you have very high, boxy vehicles, and these are low-slung and very low. They're only a few ticks over 50 inches tall.
Now, your Mark also exemplifies, Ford was doing this interesting thing where the front overhang was almost as big as the rear overhang,
The proportions on this car are a matter of debate, because that was a thing that Ford, Gene Bourdonnais had a particular fondness for, which was sort of the equal or balanced overhangs. The front ends of these rear drive cars have an overhang that you would normally associate with a front wheel drive car. And
the Mark V was even more
Mark
extreme.
V, because of the 5-mile-per-hour bumpers extending the shelf, and it looked really extreme. I happen to like this proportion. A lot of, especially designers who are very dogmatic about, you know, the
dash to axle,
short overhangs. This one has a long dash to axle, but an even longer front overhang, which is a peculiar execution, and it feels almost as long as the rear overhang, which is not excessive, but is sizable. So you have almost this little seesaw, strangely short wheelbase with long overhang. It's a peculiar approach.
Well, the car does seesaw the handle.
Well, that's a good point, but it's a peculiar proportion that only Ford did to this extreme.
Yeah.
And I think they got away with it very nicely here, because it does look good. It lengthens the front end. That was another selling feature, by the way, was here we're going again into these discussions about size, but the hood was over 6 feet long, and that was one of the hallmarks of the Continental. We'll leave this to the psychologists, what that really means. But on this car, the length of the hood was a very, very important feature.
Oh, very cool. Let's take a look under hood. So just one thing that we thought we'd do, we don't normally pop the hoods in these design discussions, but just to further show the differences between the platforms, under hood they're completely different vehicles. As Mark mentioned, this being a Torino base, you can see the HVAC system, the evaporator, you know, attached to the firewall here. These do have plastic fender liners, interestingly. So does the Continental, which was unique because the Fords and the Mercurys do not. So I don't know if Lincoln was trying to have an exclusive that Oldsmobile had this plastic fender liner that came in the late 60s.
Yeah.
But you can see all the vacuum reserve tanks for the headlights. Mark says cruise control there. That's the cruise control servo.
Which gives it the two-spoke steering wheel with the controls in the spoke, which is interesting.
That's
that was
right.
A Ford innovation.
And the SureTrack system is down here with the pump down in the well there. But same 460, the 212 horsepower 460. You have the high C number 8 juice can back there too for a vacuum reserve.
And most importantly, I have a plaque in the engine compartment.
But I noticed by this point they didn't talk about the horsepower anymore.
No, it had nothing to talk about.
It was conspicuously absent.
It was a not sales improving story.
I think they put fuel grade on.
Well, it was the switch to net horsepower rating, which you know, and then you had the low lead and no lead fuel, the lower compression. You had the regular gas and lower compression, so you lost, what was it, 365 or something?
It was,
or 70?
yeah, gross horsepower.
And then it went down to 212 net as a result of the combined onslaught of regulations and detuning the whole thing and net horsepower ratings. So yeah, it's not a sales argument.
And unfortunately, you know, beyond that, the 72s have a unique head on the 460s that is prone to detonation and doesn't have great airflow only for 1 year. But the cars, you know, look great. And here you have my high C
and
number 8 juice
both
can.
you and I have to spend some time detailing the underhood.
We do, yeah. Well, it's not, yeah. Now,
you haven't driven this too much, but I drive my Continental all the time. That's a regularly plated car. I don't have vintage plates on this one. I drive it a lot, so it's just a lovely car to drive.
Now, the fun thing for the Ford aficionado who doesn't like General Motors is Ford started using a few GM components. This says Ford air conditioner on here. This is actually a GM A6.
It's a Delco part, isn't it?
It is, both on your mark. And these are the first Fords to really use that.
You do not have an underhood light on yours?
I do not have an underhood light. No underhood light.
Well, I'm just as well I spent the money on the Mark series.
That is correct.
So I won't be left in the dark in the middle of the night on a lonely country road when that wonderful carburetor gives out.
That's right. We both have the Autolite 4300.
That's right.
Which, and this is a GM, I believe, a GM power steering pump. Even.
Is it? I didn't even know that.
So you have a GM power steering pump and a GM air conditioning system on here that is pretty humorous that they would, you know.
Well, the business goes to the lowest bidder.
I think part of it was they couldn't get on these cars the performance that they wanted out of the typical 2-piston. And these were also a bit more quiet operating.
Well, let's start up the 460s and pop those headlamp doors.
Oh, that's true, yes. All right, we'll do that. Ford never really, as opposed to the 81 Imperial that really finished off the headlights, or the 67, 66 Riviera.
The openings are pretty stark looking.
They are. They were not, these cars were not made to really show off the nighttime. I need to lubricate my headlight doors there.
Yeah, they don't have the cavities are not finished, and they expose all the screws and the technical details. It doesn't look very nice. They probably figured, well, the headlights are only on at night. You're not going to see in there anyway. But for a luxury car, they really should have spent a little bit more.
And especially now that now the headlamp actuator diaphragms get weak, the headlight doors often pop open on these cars.
Yes, mine has about a 48-hour window before enough vacuum is lost to open up the doors, because the default setting, of course, is open for safety. So when they fail, they want to make sure that the headlamps can be seen and operated.
Let's see, should we see your Mark IV's headlight?
Well, I need to start it up because there's not quite enough juice left, probably, if it sits for a couple of hours. But let's start up the 460.
Here, I'll start mine up too.
Start yours up and then we'll close, put the hoods down and turn the headlamps on.
Now my engine's cold, so it's probably going to be on a bit of a fast idle. We'll see. All right. Now these open in tandem on the Lincolns, and the Mercurys too used one actuator. I believe this is one actuator in the middle, so that they actually open in tandem.
Yes. And as you mentioned, unfinished cavity for the headlamps.
Yes. Very cool. This is probably burning a combined $10 of gas.
If you have to ask, you can't afford it.
Well, very nice. Thank you again, Mark.
You're welcome. This was fun.
Until next time on Rare Classic Cars. Thanks again for watching. Until next time, take care. Thanks again for watching this 3-part video on the Continentals for 1972, the Continental Mark IV, and the Lincoln Continental Coupe. If you have not seen parts 1 and 2, I will put the links in the video description so you can check those out. And until next time, be sure to check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right. If you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, and subscribe, as that helps the YouTube algorithm serve it up to more viewers like you. And if you really liked it, hit the super thanks button, which is the heart-shaped icon with the $sign in it at the bottom right of your video browser. Thanks again for watching. Until next time, take care.